When I first decided to become a Grandmaster, or at least try to become one, the road to GM was a pretty long road. We had a lot of combat tasks to do. I don't even really recall whether I was Master Combat Achievements yet, or if I was just below it, I don't know, but we did have a fair amount of combat achievements to do, and some combat achievements are quick, only takes a couple of minutes, a few attempts, quick and easy to do, but other ones are pretty long and they can kind of be seen as like an endurance test. Now when it comes to Nightmare, solo Nightmare, that is definitely the case. Now interestingly enough, at this point when I was going for this KC, I had already a few hundred Fasani's Nightmare KCs, but 0 regular Nightmare KC. Being an Ironman, I never bothered to do the Team Nightmare. For one thing, I couldn't ever find anybody that was even remotely interested in it, because no Ironmen are going to be doing Team Nightmare. Unfortunately, it's just not ideal to do. The drop rates are pretty poor, and as an Ironman, when you want the drop specifically in your name, even more so, that's especially the case. So I never really did Nightmare, Team or Solo, and instead I jumped into Fasani's Nightmare doing a couple hundred KCs. When I first started learning this boss, however, I did try to do Nightmare first, because I was under the impression, you know, it's a logical step, right? Like, Fasani's is supposed to be the harder variant of this boss, and exclusively a solo encounter. So I figured, let me, you know, trial and error learn Nightmare in the regular mode. But as it turns out, because the regular Nightmare is such a long fight, it's arguably more difficult than doing Fasani's, despite the fact that Fasani's Nightmare is more punishing and high hitting. Just the length of this fight makes it pretty difficult, and if you're not camping a Blood Fury, that certainly doesn't help either. But and also being an Ironman, I'm not really one to be thieving. In fact, longtime viewers of my channel will know that thieving is actually probably my most hated skill, so you won't catch me pickpocketing Vires for a Blood Shard, and I didn't exactly spend a whole lot of time farming Vire Watch Sentinels either. That is actually very slow. Point is, Blood Fury, not very ideal on a Ironman. Although in this situation, I do bring a switch. That's how stingy I was, you know, I did have a Blood Fury, but I brought in a Rancor and a Blood Fury switch, only busting out the Blood Fury when I absolutely needed it. Let's not even talk about the fact that we're using a Scythe, which is, you know, very effective, but with the Scythe, the Blood Fury uses 3 charges per swing, so very, very expensive, and the Blood Fury is just gonna get absolutely deleted. But in speaking about our armor and weapons, obviously very, very helpful that I do have the Scythe of Vitter, but I only have the one Inquisitor's piece at this point in time, that being the top. So I'm still wearing the Torva helmet and the legs. I suppose let's go over our inventory setup a little bit here, right? I did minimize my switches. For example, I didn't bother bringing in a quiver or some kind of Ava's backpack to pick up my darts for the blowpipe. I mean, we're not going to be using that a whole bunch anyways. And I did bother to bring an 8-way switch, but the less switches more so comes into play with the specialty weapons. We have the claws and the blowpipe, and yes, claws, no Voidwaker for me, unfortunately. And typically in a Fasani's KC, I'd want to be using hard food. I don't really want to go through my brews and restores and sand fuse like that. But in this specific instance, I just packed my inventory up with sand fuse and brews. In fact, you know, typically I wouldn't even bring sand fuse. I would use the Relism bombs, just save the sand fuse that I do get from here, because you won't catch me making sand fuse. To be honest, I don't really know where I would use sand fuse, but I definitely do make it a point to hold on to them, because it's just not a sustainable resource for Ironman. Kind of like cannonballs. So going for our first Nightmare KC here, this is actually going to net us a lot of combat achievement points. We're going to get multiple tasks done. If we can do this quick enough, we're going to get the speed trialist, speed chaser, and the speed runner time all in one go. I think with the amount of power creep in the game and the gear that we do have, the speed runner time should be free. And then there's a lot of other combat achievements that will just come passively if you try to do the boss as intended, as best as you can. So a lot of free points there. While you don't have to do Perfect Nightmare in a solo per se, it is good to have that mindset to go for it, just to minimize your mistakes. And, you know, because the more mistakes you make, you might run out of brews like halfway through the fight, and then at that point, it would just feel really bad, you know, because I don't know how long a Nightmare KC takes, but right now we're easily 5 to 6 minutes into the KC, and if we run out of supplies now, that's like a whole 5 to 6 minutes wasted. Never mind the amount of Scythe charges, the amount of Shadow charges, and the amount of Blood Fury charges in particular wasted at this point. Right there, dealing with that parasite was actually a bit scary. I don't know, I got pretty low health there. Over the course of this encounter, we do make it a point to try and prayer flick as well. Not the overheads, as I'm just trying to make it 100% safe on that regard, play it safe there. And I'm simply flicking my offensive prayers, that being piety, just to save a little bit of prayer. It's not the most ideal thing, you know. A real gamer right here would just set up their quick prayers correctly and flick a lot, but that's not the case here. And actually, it's a little bit more difficult to do that in this fight because Phasani's does switch between mage attacks, range attacks, and of course the melee, which is actually 1 tick faster than the other 2 attacks respectively. In a typical run, I would want to bring some sort of crush weapon to deal with the parasite right there, just to one-shot it. Although, you know, I don't know what you need to do to be able to one-shot it in regular Nightmare. I'm actually not too familiar with regular Nightmare. I know in Phasani's, you're able to one-shot them if you have an actual crush weapon, and I don't think a scythe actually counts. It's like, because the scythe is actually like a slash weapon, but it just so happens to be very, very strong for crush as well. So if you had like a ham joint or a Inquisitor's mace or something like that, that would be most ideal. But unfortunately for us, we don't have a ham joint, which would most definitely be the best in-slot crush weapon to deal with the parasites. But like I said, I'm not too familiar with regular Nightmare. I was just here to get this one combat achievement done, and I definitely don't plan on doing any more regular Nightmare beyond just doing combat achievements. We're going to be wanting to do Phasani's Nightmare for our grind to actually get Inquisitors, as well as the Orbs and the Nightmare Staff. Right now, it feels like we've been in this fight for an eternity, but I don't even think we're close to being done, unfortunately. Like, maybe about halfway through. I think this encounter is going to take about 15 minutes or so. And we've already gone through almost half of our brews, so that's a little bit scary there. We're going to have to rely on our Blood Fury a little bit more, I think, and definitely try not to make any mistakes. It's really just a chip damage. I don't think I've made too many mistakes over the course of this run so far, but the chip damage is what really gets to you. And as an Ironman, like, this is just pretty painful. It's like, do I chug all these brews, or do I swing away with the Blood Fury? And, like, neither thing just feels very good, you know? We also did bring our Saturated Heart in with us, just because we're probably most likely going to use this at least 3 times in this encounter. Something crazy like that every 5 minutes. Now, at this point, I wish I'd had more to say about this encounter, but it's really what you see right now, like, you rinse and repeat over and over again until we reach the finish line. So with that being said, I'm gonna let this play out for you guys and see how many combat achievements we picked up from this, what kind of time we got. But yeah, I think I've said all that needed to be said about this fight.